Clementson as today's presenter. She's worked in ELT for over 20 years, teaching and developing materials both in Spain and in England. She's a test writer for Cambridge English Language Assessment and an author on face-to-face advanced level and English Unlimited. She's currently teaching advanced learners at the University of Brighton and is interested in the cognitive and affective aspects of second language learning, particularly in relation to skills. So, over to you, Theresa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Charlotte and the team at CUP, and thank you, everyone, for logging on. It's great to see people attending from all over the world, very exciting countries. We've got India, Greece, Switzerland, Turkey, Russia. Welcome, everyone, to my very first webinar. I'm going to be talking about teaching advanced learners, which many teachers find a challenging level to teach. So why is it challenging? Advanced learners need what all learners need effectively, which is cognitive challenge, which is appropriate for their needs, and effective engagement in class and with their learning generally. But it can feel more difficult to fulfill these needs at an advanced level. So what do all learners need? Well, one of the issues affecting advanced learners is motivation. So advanced learners can already express their ideas fluently and should have a fairly extensive vocabulary. So how can we continue to stretch advanced learners? Also, how can we continue to engage their interest in class? If learners can notice the gap between what they can and they can't say, then they will be challenged. And if they can see that they're still making progress with the skills of speaking and writing, I believe they will be engaged in the learning process. So it's for this reason I'm going to focus on these productive skills in this webinar. In order to illustrate my points, I'm going to show some examples of activities and language from Face-to-Face, the second edition of the Advanced coursebook. And I'm also going to refer to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. The Common European Framework, often known as the CEF, provides a clear set of defined learning competencies or practical goals for learning in all the skills areas. So students will probably be entering the advanced classes at the upper end of the B2 level. I'm going to show you a table. If you have a look at this table, it's for spoken fluency, and you can see the gap that students have to bridge between B2 plus, which is the higher end of B2, and C1. So between B2 and C1, you can see that fluency in communication should become almost effortless, and that this might be a problem only when students try to express their thoughts about a conceptually difficult subject. But then if we move up beyond C1 to C2, then the goal is to find precisely the right words. So precision and having access to the right words in any situation and in extended speech requires a wide and precise range of lexis so that people can express their thoughts appropriately and without any hesitation. So how can we help students to bridge the gap between B2, C1 and beyond into C2? An extensive vocabulary comes from reading and listening. So what we need to do to stretch advanced students is to select texts that offer conceptually difficult topics for students to read, to listen to discuss, and to write about. Most current advanced course books do provide authentic text, mostly from newspapers, magazines, and some from books. So I'm going to show you an example of an extract from a book in Face-to-Face. This is an extract from the autobiography of Daniel Tammet, who you can see on the cover of his book there, Born on a Blue Day. which is an autobiography or a memoir, really, of his life and dealing with a particular condition, which is autism. So Daniel is an autistic savant, which means he's also a genius, and the book tells the story of how he deals with that condition. It's easy to read. He writes in a very sort of engaging way, and it's also quite inspirational. So one of the limitations of course books is that you cannot have texts which are too long because of the constraints of the format. So as well as providing interesting texts, authentic texts in course books, we also need to encourage our advanced students to do extensive reading or listening outside the class. Here, for example, if students like the extract, they like the sound of Daniel, you could encourage them to read the book. Many texts in books have these kind of links where, because they're authentic, they link to something in real life which you can encourage students to follow up if they're interested. I'm going to come back to extensive reading later, but now I'm going to look at how we can exploit extracts like this one to revise and extend students' vocabulary, because it's through developing vocabulary that, sorry, I'm just plugging something in. It's through developing vocabulary that we can help students to find precisely the right words, even when we're talking about complex topics. For example, here, the condition of living with autism, for example, which Daniel describes in his book. So one thing we can do to extend vocabulary is to draw attention to different forms of familiar words. Adjectives, for example, like normal, necessary, brilliant, which all come up in this extract in front of you. We can also focus on challenging vocabulary, which is in the text itself. If you have a look, I've got a little arrow somewhere. I'm going to try using this. You can see words like monotone, resonance. Now, there's absorbed here, over here. Okay. So words that come up in text at this level are high-level difficult words, and we can focus students' attention on them. I'm going to have a look at how we can do that in the next slide. So students will be familiar with adjectives like normal, brilliant, necessary. But what we can do when these words come up in class or in text is to elicit the less frequent forms. So, for example, have a think about the noun for normal and for brilliant, or the adverb for necessary. We can also look at or elicit any stress shifts when you're moving from one form to another. So, for example, have a look at these. Normal, stress shifts from the first to the second. Necessary shifts from the first to the third. So we can elicit those changes and those new forms from students, so they extend beyond the most frequent forms of words. In focusing on more challenging vocabulary, like monotone, absorbed, and resonance, which were in the text, again, we can elicit the other forms of the words, so students extend and generate more vocabulary. So, for example, the adjective for monotone, the noun for absorb, and the verb for resonance. Have a quick look. And again, checking any stress shifts from one form to the other. So in this case, just monotonous from monotone was a stress shift. And encourage students to record all the new forms. I find I never have to encourage them. They're always writing down as many words as they can. Okay, another way to help students to extend their vocabulary is through word building and word families. So an understanding of the meaning of different prefixes and suffixes can help learners to be more creative with language. So it's useful to focus on these productive affixes. Prefixes like these can have more than one meaning, with sometimes only subtle differences. So, for instance, if we look at inter, I'm going to type 2 words in here. If we think about the difference between interaction and interlocking, and think about the meaning of inter in both of those words, a very small difference. Have a think about what it might mean. So, inter in interaction, I would suggest that means between two things or people, interaction, for example, between you and myself. But in interlocking, inter means joined together, for example, like the links in a chain. If we look at suffixes, productive suffixes, these can again really help students to generate a range of different words. So if we have a look at these suffixes and think about words that we can generate from them. So free, we've got, for example, smoke-free, stress-free, even scot-free, all of which are challenging. Well, certainly scot-free is a challenging word to which many students will probably not be aware of. Have a look at the others, lead, proof, ish and conscious, and just spend a few seconds thinking of 2 words for each of them. Great, some are coming up now. We've got bluish, which is very nice. So ish for colours. Don't know if anyone can think of other things that ish is used for. We've got soundproof, waterproof. I love anguish, but I fear ang isn't a word in its own right. 40-ish, so ages. Childproof, foolproof, lovely, lovely. Good, okay, and self-conscious for conscious. Misled, which is lovely as well. Thank you. So, I'm going to show you a page from Face to Face which covers those productive suffixes. Exercises like the ones on this page can help develop learners' understanding and use of productive suffixes. So these examples are drawn from a listening about Satish Kumar, the man shown here, who is an environmental activist who walked 8,000 miles around the world for peace, taking no money at all with him. So these exercises, for example, 3A, choosing the correct suffix, 3B, guessing meaning from context, and then in 3C and 4A we've got extending the set, and in 4B, personalising the new word. So these are all useful activities, not only for learning vocabulary in class, but they also provide learners with strategies for generating new words and extending vocabulary independently. Again, if students are interested in Satish Kumar, they could easily develop this from this topic. So they could look up Satish Kumar online, find out more about him, or they could be set projects where they research similar personalities or similar journeys and present their findings to the class. Moving on, the CEF descriptor for building fluency at C2 level is to achieve effortless, unhesitating flow. So if learners can go beyond single word items and automatize chunks of language, then they're more likely to be able to achieve effortless fluency. Encouraging students to record and learn strong and frequent collocations can really build fluency and raise learners' levels. So the words themselves, as you can see here, don't have to be high level, but many combinations of words produce high level language. So if you look at the key words in each phrase, just have a think about the different parts of speech that make up the collocations. Okay, so an element of truth, we've got noun, noun. Bitterly regret, rough surface. Let's have a look. So adverb, verb, and adjective, noun. Excellent, thank you. So you can ask students to identify collocations in authentic texts and categorize them in the way that we've done here. Different combinations lend themselves to different kinds of activities. So for example, bitterly regret, the adverb verb collocations really lend themselves to odd one out type exercises where students decide which combinations are correct or not correct. So for example, we might have here, we've got bitterly, I'm just typing this in, perfectly, deeply. Students can decide which one is incorrect, is the odd one out. Okay, I don't know if you're getting this exactly at the time that I'm writing it. Again, the adjective noun collocations can be extended through lots of activities. You can extend a rough surface, find another noun that collocates with rough. For example, sea, a rough sea. Have a think and see if you can think of any more. But then we can extend that through antonyms for the adjectives. So for a rough start, that's nice, a rough deal, a rough estimate, excellent. But then let's try and extend through the adjective. So what are the antonyms for rough here? And have a think about the antonym for rough for surface, the antonym for rough in sea, as in ocean, sea. Smooth, lovely. A smooth surface and a calm sea. So there are lots of ways we can build on collocations that are present in text to extend and develop students' vocabulary further. If we regularly elicit collocations from the class when new words come up and encourage students to record the chunks rather than single items, this will help extend lexis and build fluency. For example, going back to the productive suffixes, you came up with smoke-free, stress-free, and what would be the collocation that would go with smoke-free and stress-free. Let's just put them up here again. A smoke-free zone, lovely. A stress-free zone, that's interesting, yeah, and environment. Environment was the one I was feeling was a very strong collocation, as is zone. Yeah, lovely. Okay. So, compensating, another skill area for speaking in the CEF. Sorry, I'm just turning something off. Compensating for gaps in vocabulary or grammatical structures is another speaking skill which enables L2 speakers to sound effortlessly fluent. So at this level, learners should have a fair number of strategies to go round a word that they don't know, using circumlocution or paraphrase. But we can help develop these skills further. If you actually look at C2 here, it suggests that learners should barely need to paraphrase at all, but should aim for a kind of substitution that's instantaneous or spontaneous. That's fairly challenging, and it can only be achieved by continuing to build an extensive vocabulary productively that students have at their fingertips. So trying to find a way around explaining a word helps learners notice the gap in their knowledge. Going back to some of those challenging words in the Daniel Tammet extract, monotone and resonance, asking students to explain either of those words is a challenging exercise, and I suggest it might challenge native speakers and many teachers. But if we regularly elicit explanations and definitions from students in class when high-level words come up, and students are asked to do this regularly, their explaining, defining and exemplification skills will improve incredibly fast and rapidly. At the same time, we can push students further towards the ability to substitute equivalent terms by eliciting synonyms and antonyms for new words. This can really help not only to explain new lexis to the class, but also develops this habit of substitution quickly, quick substitution when students are learning new words. So again, a couple of challenging questions on there. Another word for monotonous. If you remember, this was used to describe the tone of Daniel's voice when he speaks. So another word for monotonous, can you think of a synonym? Any ideas? Flat, lovely. Dull, dull, good. Okay. An unkinder word might be boring. I'm glad you've, tedious, excellent. Then, okay, let's now think of the opposite. Good, you've come up with lively. Droll is interesting, yeah, amusing, entertaining, exciting. And we've, yeah, exactly. So lots of lovely synonyms and antonyms for monotonous. And again, just developing this habit every time new words come up, pushing them further, thinking of new forms, putting them in collocations, eliciting explanations and definitions, and finding substitute terms quickly every time new words come up is a way to really build and extend advanced students' vocabulary. As I mentioned earlier, one of the limitations of coursebook texts is the length of the text, so they're constrained by space. So as well as reading shorter, complex texts intensively and exploiting them for language, advanced students need to do extensive reading and listening. And the joy of being advanced level is that students have access to a vast range of authentic texts which they can get to grips with. It's really helpful to encourage this in class and to find ways to motivate students to extend their reading and listening, even if they don't have a reading habit in their own culture. I wanted to mention the Reading Challenge, which is something that was set up by the Open Learning Centre in the University of Brighton, where I teach. This was so successful at encouraging students of all levels to read, even if they really didn't think they were interested. So students in the challenge, students are encouraged to borrow a series of books over a period of time. And for each book that they read, they have to write a couple of sentences answering a specific question about the book. If they answer the question, they then get a stamp on a card, a Reading Challenge card, which is a little bit like the kind of cards you get from Starbucks when you buy a coffee. So when they have 5 stamps on their card, it's put into a prize draw, and students can win something. So this was very successful in motivating our students to read, and it can be adjusted to any level. You can use graded readers at lower levels and full-length, novels at higher levels. Another way to incorporate extensive reading into the class is to share interesting newspaper articles selected by students. I regularly ask my students to find an article from a newspaper over the weekend and to read and understand it and come to class prepared to explain it to a group. There are lots of things you can do with this, lots of variations. You can ask students to select, say, 5 items of vocabulary that they need in order to talk about that topic, and they can present this to their group. Or they can write 2 discussion questions prompted by the article. So you can also link this into, for example, your coursebook topic by asking students to find articles on a specific theme and change that theme every week. Or you can ask a few students to do it every week and rotate around the class. So this is an excellent way to give advanced students exposure to challenging texts and topics, as well as broadening cultural horizons. I'll talk about that in a minute. Using authentic videos in class is another engaging way to give students access to conceptually difficult topics and complex language. I'm going to show you an example of a video lesson in face-to-face. So most course books, or many course books at least, have sequences of video lessons. This is a lesson from face-to-face which combines an expert talking about the Tower of London, which you can see in the background, and its history, together with vox pops of tourists like Amel in the picture, who are visiting the tower. And again, this lesson can be extended by asking students to do their own research. If they're in London or they're interested on the Tower of London, further research, or specific places, either in the country where they're studying or places they want to present to other students in their own countries, and then present their findings to the class. So all of these lessons provide a starting point where students can go much further, extend this and use their own ideas. So one of the very exciting things about teaching nowadays is that we have instant access to a vast range of materials on the internet. I've put some video links, and this is really just a snapshot, as you know, of the millions of things that are out there. TED.com, you may be familiar with, is an excellent resource containing videos of thousands of powerful talks of between 10 and 20 minutes, which really will stretch even advanced learners. And the talks cover everything from science to business to education to global issues. And each talk also includes a transcript and subtitles if needed. You can, for example, ask students again to take turns choosing a TED video to show the class and to lead a discussion in the same way as with a newspaper text. Through doing this, you can kind of encourage student choice and autonomy. Again, a motivating thing at this level. There's also some examples of other sites which offer great lessons based around films and viral videos, like viralelt.wordpress.com, which has videos of clips of videos which have gone viral, together with discussion questions, and Film English, which are lessons, ready-made lessons built around film clips. So it will really motivate advanced students to be presented with challenging, complex, authentic materials, so they can continue to notice the gaps in their knowledge and skills and identify how they can continue to make progress in their learning. So it's not just language competence that students need to be able to express themselves fluently and appropriately. They also need pragmatic competence. I'm going to go back a little bit because I've forgotten to mention these news links. Again, these are just 1 or 2 that can be found online, but students can find it very motivating to look at news about their own countries in English, and most countries around the world have English versions of their papers. So the Times of India, China Daily, we've got the Buenos Aires Herald here from Argentina, And as I said, most countries will have something in English. I found, I mean, with certain groups of students, I regularly teach large groups of Chinese teachers, and I found that when I showed them that it was possible to find news about China in England in English, they were incredibly excited and were much more engaged in the class than if I asked them to find news about England where they were studying at the time. So moving on to pragmatic competence. As I said, to be able to express yourself fluently, you need much more than just language competence. The ability to adjust language and register according to context will enable students to really communicate freely and appropriately in most situations. So how can we help advanced students develop their pragmatic competence? If you look at these descriptors from the CEF for flexibility, you can see that this is challenging at any level. Adjusting what you say and the means of expressing it to the situation and the recipient, and adopting an appropriate level of formality depending on context and circumstances. So knowing how to, for example, participate in a business meeting or lead a discussion with friends, strangers or colleagues, knowing how to interrupt people politely or be tactful, are all examples of situations or scenarios which demand not only the knowledge of complex language structures or phrases, but also requiring a complex understanding of what's appropriate in different situations and the flexibility to respond accordingly and spontaneously. So I'm going to show you an example of a lesson in face-to-face, which requires students to adjust to a particular context and a specific recipient. Here, students are practicing being tactful, using tactful language with different recipients, including a friend, that's the one with the trousers, a waiter, a boss, and here a partner going out for the evening. So in a range of different scenarios. Being able to adjust to particular situations and recipients and adopting an appropriate level of formality will take even advanced students beyond their normal language, beyond their comfort zone, which is where they really need to be if they're going to raise their level. So how can we push advanced students out of their comfort zone? We need to move them beyond informal conversation. So they have to use more complex language required in particular situations, such as, for example, negotiating in a business meeting, taking part in a radio interview, or having conversations with different members of a family. So role-playing is something that can be done in advanced classes to push students out of their normal conversational parameters. And this can be done in a task-based way, monitoring students' language and feeding back on inappropriate use of language and providing any necessary input. So I have focused so far on extending vocabulary and building spoken fluency. But clearly, another vital way to develop advanced students' output is through writing. So taking a genre-based approach to writing can be a very useful way to push students out of their comfort zone and to explore what language and what style is appropriate in specific circumstances. So, for example, here, writing an online travel review, which many people might do before taking, or after taking a holiday rather, Writing an application, for example, applying for a course, student course, or applying for a job, or making a proposal either to colleagues or friends. So I'm going to show you a writing activity from Face-to-Face where students are writing an online travel review following this example about Venice. Class writing activities are a great opportunity to improve accuracy while simultaneously extending vocabulary and adjusting language appropriacy according to the recipient. And as we know, writing really enables students to fix the language in their minds. Also, taking the time to do writing in class really allows students to focus on the gaps in their knowledge and notice what's necessary to bridge those gaps. If they're doing this in class, it's really helpful because teachers can provide the necessary input, and I believe as much writing as possible should be done actually in class rather than as homework to stretch advanced learners' productive skills. And as I said here, for example, you can see an example of really focusing students on accuracy, which is something we haven't actually really talked about yet. Okay, so I'm moving towards the end of my my talk, so I hope you're all starting to think of questions. What I've tried to talk about is, or I hope I've explained, is why and how it's necessary to provide the appropriate cognitive challenge in order to get the best out of our advanced learners. So if advanced students can still notice that gap between what they can say and what they want to say, I believe they will continue to be challenged and stretched in class. And we can provide that challenge by giving students materials which cover conceptually difficult topics and texts to read, to listen to discuss and to write about. And we can exploit those texts intensively in class to extend vocabulary, which will help learners find precisely the right words for almost any situation that might arise, however unexpected it might be. So then, with this extensive vocabulary and range of equivalent terms, substitute terms to express complex ideas at their fingertips, students will eventually be able to achieve effortless fluency, the goal at C1. So, as well as improving vocabulary and fluency, we need to help students achieve the pragmatic competence that's required to deal with different situations and recipients. So they need to be able to be challenged to adjust their language so that it's appropriate for any context. If we continue to draw our students' attention to this gap in their knowledge and skills, and then subsequently help them to bridge that gap, then they will be able to see their continued progress in English, and that should ensure continued motivation and engagement with learning up to and beyond the C1 level. As I said, a lot of the examples that I've shown here today are from Face-to-Face Advanced, second edition, which you may be familiar, and there's a picture of the book here. And that's the end of my talk. I can see lots of questions are coming up, and I'm really happy to take your questions now. And I think, Charlotte, you're going to guide me.
Yes, that's right. Thank you very much for a really interesting session. We've had a question come in via Twitter from Isabel Bueno. Should we use the lexical approach to work on vocabulary with advanced students?
I think it's always good to use a combination of approaches, and I think there's lots of really useful things in the lexical approach for all levels, including advanced, and obviously the focus on chunks of language rather than individual items is something that comes from the lexical approach, and I wholeheartedly endorse. So everything I was saying about encouraging students to learn and record vocabulary in chunks, in phrases, will really help to extend their vocabulary, because they're getting 2, 3, 4, 5 words as opposed to one. But also in learning them, those items as chunks, they will increase their fluency. Rather than thinking about each word, then learning a chunk and coming out with it accurately will make them sound more fluent and feel more confident and able to express their ideas more fluently. So yes, there are, I certainly think the lexical approach is a good approach with advanced learners, but I tend to be cautious about using any one approach. I believe in an eclectic system where you draw whatever you need to suit your learners and what you're teaching them.
Okay, great. We've had another few questions come in. There's lots coming in now. Elena Longo wanted to know, in order to progress from B2 plus to C1, what percentage of lessons to individual exposure do you think is necessary to the language? So is the individual exposure more important than the lessons themselves?
I mean, obviously, again, exposure to the language, and does she mean in an L2 environment? I'm guessing she does.
Yeah, more natural exposure, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, nothing beats exposure to the language, and that's why so many students go to a native speaker country, wherever that might be around the world, to learn English, so that you're not only learning from a class, a teacher, and a book and materials, but also being able to listen to and have access to the materials which are around you every day. And of course that's incredibly helpful. But obviously it's not possible for huge numbers of people around the world, and what we are lucky with now is that the access to the internet. And I'd hate to say that the internet is replaces face-to-face contact, because it doesn't, in the same way that I hope in a sense that a webinar doesn't replace a real live seminar or lesson with a teacher. However, it's a great sort of substitute where we can't all be in the same place at the same time. So nothing beats exposure to the language, direct exposure to the language. However, I do think that that's not available for the vast majority of people, and there are many things out there which can do very well for learners. I've had really quite a few Arabic speakers in my class who are amazingly fluent and have learnt that level of fluency, advanced fluency, with no contact with an L1, L2 environment. Sorry, they have learnt their language entirely from watching television. So I found that astounding, but it's certainly possible with the right motivation. It's certainly possible.
That's really interesting. Thank you. You spoke about encouraging students to do extensive reading. Natalia Rodionova asked whether it's a good idea for students to make notes whilst they're doing this extensive reading, and whether you'd recommend that they do any projects after this kind of reading.
Yeah, I think there are lots of things you can do with extensive reading. I think the main my main aim with extensive reading would be to make sure, or to give students the motivation to do it and to finish a book and to move on to the next one, which is why I recommend the reading challenge, because you're not asking students to do too much. You're just really asking for proof that they've read and understood the book, and hopefully having some kind of motivation to start a new one. In terms of setting students tasks, I mean, I think it may well be a good idea with students who really don't have a reading habit. So you could ask, for example, if students are studying a set text as they might be for proficiency. Obviously, you need to have a focus in the class on that book, and it might be that you do it chapter by chapter. Students read a chapter and then come in and discuss it and look at vocabulary with a group, for example. So I really think it depends on the needs of the students in that class and how much encouragement they need. If you're asking students to read and you don't think they're doing it, then perhaps you need to take a more direct approach and give students tasks. And but I do think there needs to be some check in the classroom that the reading you're asking them to do outside is happening, and bringing that extensive reading back into the class. How you do that is obviously dependent on your lessons, on the time you have, and on what you've asked students to read.
Great, thank you very much. We've got another question that's related in terms of motivation from Elena Longo. When students feel that writing in class is a waste of time, and how can we persuade them that it's not the case?
That's really interesting. I mean, my experience is that students very rarely think writing in class is a waste of time, but teachers worry about asking them to do it. I think what happens at lower levels is that students are very nervous of writing. They're used to doing the writing at home, taking an awful long time over doing it, and then getting it back with lots of correction and feeling very underconfident, which is another good reason for bringing writing into the classroom at all levels, because there are so many things we can do in the class to make writing less scary and less stressful. So, for example, at all levels, I encourage students to do a lot of collaborative writing, where they're writing together in pairs, and in that way they can generate ideas together and help each other with any difficulties that arise with language, vocabulary, or expressing themselves. I think students find this incredibly motivating, and it's fun because it's interactive. Again, with students, I've had classes where the major problem, even at higher levels, at advanced level, is generating ideas. And if you give students, before setting any writing, give students the chance to generate ideas together in class and to engage them in discussion, so that writing isn't just between the student and the piece of paper, it's properly communicative and interactive, then writing actually becomes fun. Yeah, I think I agree. There's some comments coming up here about advanced learners enjoy doing writing most of the time. I totally agree. I very, very rarely come across students who don't want to write, particularly advanced students, because for them, the sort of the difficulties have gone. I mean, they can pretty much write fluently. At advanced level, it really is a case of focusing their writing and trying to make them write, one, more accurately, and two, as I said, giving them parameters so that they're having to adjust their writing for particular purposes and particular audiences. Somebody's just suggested dictogloss, a great lesson for collaborative writing, which absolutely, dictogloss is a great lesson as well. There are lots of ways to make writing very enjoyable in class and to take the stress associated with writing away.
Perfect, thank you very much. We've got another question from Ika Denise, who asks, how can we cope with the discouragement and hesitancy that emerge as a result of exposure to challenging authentic materials?
Yeah, again, I think that that discouragement often happens at lower levels, though I would say that I do introduce authentic text to students almost from elementary, but just shorter or simpler texts, for example, little snippets from newspapers or magazines. And I think students generally do find it motivating to be presented with something which is real, and they can see that it's real, and they can see where it comes from. I would advocate adjusting the task, not the text, which is often the case with, or we to deal with difficult authentic texts. So not trying to ask students to do too much with it. We can use difficult texts just to focus students on reading fairly quickly, skimming and trying to get the main idea of the text, which is a really, really useful skill when they start to read more extensively, rather than focusing on the details and on particular facts or whatever in a text, but to actually read something really quite superficially, quite quickly, and think about what, for example, is the attitude of the person that's writing. What is the main point of the text, or who is it aimed at? Those kind of gist questions that really help students to focus on the overall meaning of a difficult text, which is how we would read in our own language. So adjusting the task, I think, rather than the text, which, to be honest, at advanced level, you don't really want to be amending or revising the text. That would take quite a long time on top of your other responsibilities. But you can also you can always abridge it, cut it back and use a shorter extract as well.
Thank you very much. We've had another question about technology in the classroom from Surya Nimagada, who asked your thoughts on the use of technology in teaching advanced level.
I mean, that's huge. Again, I think it really depends on your teaching environment and what you have access to. And I've taught in every environment, from teaching in a room with absolutely nothing at all and a handheld tape recorder to my situation now, where I'm very lucky because I have access to smart boards and everything that I need. And I think that technology is enormously helpful in many situations as a teaching tool. I love the smart board. I love having an interactive board that I can ask students to come up and work with. And also smartboard technology or whiteboard electronic boards allow you to prepare your boards before the class. So and to prepare attractive boards instead of just writing as you're going along. So of course it's technology. That kind of technology is a fantastic tool for the teacher, but I always think we have to remember that it is just a tool, and if you don't have it, it doesn't mean that you can't teach just as well as everybody else. And also, one of the things about technology is that it very often doesn't work, and as teachers we just have to get used to the fact that we might turn up in class and nothing's working, and I'm sure we've all been in that situation. You have to be able to stand up there and teach the class just as effectively with absolutely no help from technology. So I think it's a great tool, and we just need to remember that that's all it is. The technology doesn't make the class, it's the teacher that makes the class work.
Thank you very much. We've had a question from Fernando, who asks, how would you start a C1 intensive course for students that recently passed their B2 exams?
That seems to be a very broad question. I mean, obviously when we start a new class, we're never quite sure what level students have. I mean, they may have passed, it depends on your institution or where students are coming from. I mean, I always, again, whatever level, I would tend to start a new course by providing some kind of activity which allows students to use all their skills, so I can get a sense of students' level right at the beginning, and how they interact, and any weaknesses that they need to work on. So again, something like the newspaper lesson that I suggested, or showing a video so that students are reading or listening, perhaps taking notes, comparing their notes with another student, and you can go around and see how effective their note-taking skills are. Listening to them as they're talking together, scaffolding each other's learning, and then asking perhaps in their pairs or groups to present their ideas to the class so you can hear their spoken language and accuracy as well. So something I would try to cover all the skills in some kind of interactive lesson, so that I can monitor and give students a chance to get to know each other, listen to them, watch how they tackle materials, and spot any weaknesses among individual students, so that I know where to go in the next lessons that follow.
Thank you very much. I think we've just got time for one final question, which Marianne Thana has asked, what is a good lesson book for speaking lessons? And she noticed she's got face-to-face on the screen there, so would you recommend that for speaking lessons?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's lots of face-to-face involves, many communicative activities. So wherever there's a language focus, like the language focuses that I've shown during the webinar, there's always a speaking activity to practice them. And giving students good topics is obviously the way to motivate them to speak. And I think the topics in face-to-face are interesting and provide lots of access to different things. For example, the Satish Kumar, Daniel Tammet are just examples of the kind of people that are focused on, characters that are focused on, who have interesting lives and are dealing with interesting and, as I said, conceptually difficult topics that will push learners so that when they're talking about the topic, they're having to use new and higher level language. So certainly I recommend face-to-face. There's a lot of interesting topics in there, and there's lots and lots and lots of opportunities, not only that are given directly for speaking, but also opportunities which the teacher can exploit further to make lessons very interactive and interesting for students.
Thank you very much, Theresa. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in this session. But before we go, I'd just like to tell you about some of the webinars that we've got coming up in the next just over a week. We've actually got an extra webinar tomorrow at the usual time of 3 p.m. Where Adrian Duff will be repeating his webinar on developing speaking skills for adult learners. And we've also got next week, on Tuesday the 30th of June, Kate Bentley will discuss the importance of teaching content to young learners. And my colleagues will be sharing links for you to sign up to those in the chat. And don't forget that your certificate of attendance for today's webinar will be sent out automatically later this week, so you don't need to email us to ask about that. If you've missed any of the webinar, I think there's been a couple of people that mentioned they've missed the start. We'll be sharing the recordings on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Cambridge UPELT, and on our blog as well. And we'll be sharing links for those. You can keep up with all of our news on our Facebook page as well as on our Twitter account. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar, and we'll see you soon.